Commissioners, everyone, welcome to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. Today is January 26th, and we would like to welcome you and encourage your participation in tonight's meeting. As you know, the Planning Commission, or you may not know, is an appointed decision-making body. We've been appointed by your town council for land use matters regarding the town of Los Gatos. We have 3 agenda items today, and again, we are thrilled for your attendance and we welcome your participation. A couple of housekeeping, just the usual reminder, if you have any electronic devices, to please silence them. If you do plan on speaking tonight, we do have speaker cards that I do need you to fill out. And if you could either, I guess, this side, if you could just deposit those. We need those for the written record, and so if you fill it out, it ensures our accuracy with our minutes. And the third is all of the documents that you will see us reading. They are available for your review, and they should all be present in the lobby. And then the fourth thing, a personal note, I have a terrible cold, so if you see me chewing on these cough drops, I apologize ahead of time. I'm going to need them throughout the night, so I just want to apologize for that inconvenience if you hear me mumbling. So with that said, could we begin roll call?
Commissioner Bourgeois.
Here.
Commissioner Ogle. Here. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Erickson.
Here.
Vice Chair Jensen.
Here.
Chair Sayoc.
Here.
And Commissioner Talsford has an excused absence.
Okay. And Commissioner Bourgeois, can you lead us tonight in our Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure.
Okay, the first item that we need to get through is our minutes from January 12th, our last meeting. Are there any comments to the minutes before us? If not, would anyone like to make a motion? Commissioner Bourgeois?
I'll move to approve the minutes of the meeting of the 12th of January, 2011.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Bourgeois. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Commissioner Ogle just seconded. So I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, it passes 6-0 with Commissioner Telesfor as absent. Written communications. I believe we have just one item. It's our desk item, and it concerns item number 1. It's fairly short, 2 pages, so if you do not get a chance to review it before we get to item 1, just give me a brief heads up, and I'll give some pause so that we can take care of that. Okay. Requested continuances, we have none for today, and we're now at subcommittee reports. Actually, all of us also sit on a subcommittee. There are 3 subcommittees, and this is an opportunity for those that have had a subcommittee since our last meeting to provide the others with an update. And I believe we've had one meeting today by Historic Preservation, and the chair of that committee, Commissioner Erickson, could you please provide us an update?
We had a very robust Historic Preservation Committee meeting this afternoon. There were 5 items that came in front of the committee. The first one was at 367 Los Gatos Boulevard, the so-called Thrash House. There was a proposal to change the front entry to that building, and the committee continued the item to a future meeting, asking for some further changes from what was proposed. The second item was at 125 Masol Avenue, which was some alterations to windows in the property. The committee acted to recommend to the Director of Community Development that the proposed modifications be accepted. Then there was a request to make a recommendation to the Development Review Committee to demolish what may be a pre-1941 structure at 14300 Laura Drive. It's unclear whether it qualifies as a historic building by the date of its construction or not. So the committee recommended that it be authorized to be demolished. The right findings. Then there is a proposal that will come to the Planning Commission eventually, is a proposed remodeling of a section of a building that is on Santa Cruz Avenue. Specifically, addresses are 49 and 51 North Santa Cruz. They're proposing to, there's two different retail operations, Gardino's Restaurant and a small retail store next door to it, and they're proposing to remodel and expand Gardino's Restaurant to the size, into a single larger restaurant. The Historic Preservation Committee was asked to make a recommendation that will come eventually to the Planning Commission on the exterior modifications to the building that was also continued so that they could propose modifications that were more consistent with the intent of the town. We also had a discussion item for a property at 198 Broadway, which is a large tract of property with two structures on it at the edge of the Broadway Historic District, and the present owners would like either for the town to consider either removing the property from the historic district or authorizing the demolition of that property. We provided some guidance to the attorney and the real estate agent who's representing the present owner in terms of what might be possible. It's likely when that comes forward that the Historic Preservation Committee will be asking, depending upon how they come back with their formal application, asking guidance from the town attorney on some issues that might surface as a result of that proposal.
Okay, thank you for that update. Commissioners, any questions from the subcommittee report? Okay, very good. The next portion of our meeting is called verbal communications. This is an opportunity for anyone in attendance to speak on an item not on the agenda. As I mentioned, we do have 3 items that are there and that I have several speaker cards, but if you are here to speak on an item not on the agenda, now's your time to do so. I don't have any cards. I don't see anyone moving forward, so I'm going to go ahead and move to our public hearing portion, okay? So the very first agenda item that we have tonight, it is subdivision application M-10-007 located at 381 Pennsylvania Avenue. Ms. Bailey, do we have a staff presentation on this?
Yes, but first, staff would like to state for the record that there was an ad in the Los Gatos Weekly Times on January 11th, 2011 on page 35. Regarding this application, which contained the town's logo. Would like to state that this ad was not placed by the town, it was not authorized by the town, nor did the town have any acknowledgement of this ad. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Mosley for the report.
Thank you. To start off, I would like to remind you again that you do have a desk item on this application, and at this time you will have received the original staff report, 2 addendum reports, a desk item from the previous Planning Commission meeting, a cover sheet and attachment that was routed with the packets, and now a second desk item. So you should have all of those before you right now. The subject site is located at the southwest corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and Wissahickon Avenue. The applicant is requesting a 2-lot subdivision. The existing lot size for the property is 24,433 square feet, and the proposed lot sizes would be 11,352 square feet and 13,081 square feet. The proposed lots meet town code requirements in terms of lot size, lot frontage and depth, and the required setbacks for the existing structures will be maintained with the proposed property line. The property owner originally submitted an application for a certificate of compliance to legalize 2 lots that were created in 1892 and an application for a lot line adjustment. Based on the documentation provided by the applicant, staff determined that a certificate of compliance could not be approved, and staff directed the applicant to either provide additional documentation to support the requirements of the Subdivision Map Act to legalize the 2 lots, or legalize the lots, or to modify the application to a 2-lot subdivision. The applicant revised their application and filed for a subdivision. The Development Review Committee held a public hearing for the proposed subdivision on November 16th, 2010. Several members of the public were present at the meeting, including the appellant. Staff heard the public testimony in regards to their concerns and the impact on their neighborhood traffic, noise, and property values. Staff's responses to these concerns are included in your staff report. Since the application met all town requirements and the required findings to deny the subdivision could not be made, the DRC approved the application. This decision was appealed on November 16th, 2010. As shown in the analysis in your staff report, the proposed subdivision complies with the town code and general plan and creates two similarly sized and shaped lots for the neighborhood. The proposed subdivision meets the requirements of the R18 zoning designation, and any new development on the site will be required to comply with town ordinances and standards and will be reviewed through the required process. Staff recommends the Planning Commission uphold the decision of the Development Review Committee to approve the proposed subdivision. This completes staff's report.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley. Commissioners, do I have any questions for Ms. Mosley at this time? Okay, so two things I'd like to do before we begin the public public hearing portion of this. The first is, with a quick show of hands, if you can show me that you've done your own site visit. Okay, and I would like to disclose that when I did my site visit, as I usually do with all visits, I like to do a 360, and I did knock on the neighbor's door at 371 and was provided access to get to Laurel Lane in the back. Okay, but we had no verbal communication on the item. Any other disclosures? Commissioner Bourgeois?
Thank you, Chair Zayak. I also received a voicemail message. I did not have correspondence with the appellant, but he did leave me a voicemail message basically stating the same things that were stated in the email that was provided to us.
And actually, I would like to state on the record that I believe all of us, correct me if I'm wrong, have received email correspondence as well. Okay? Oh. Okay, so 5 of the 6 of us present have received email correspondence. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, thank you, Ms. Bailey. And then the second item I'd like to do is just a reminder of how we plan to do the appeal process. We will have a presentation by the appellant, and that is 5 minutes. It's cumulative, so if there are several persons that will speak as the appellant, that will be 5 minutes total. Then we will have questions of the appellant by the commissioners. Next is the presentation by the applicant, and again, that's cumulative 5 minutes. And I don't have speaker cards for either the appellant or the applicant, so if you could just send those so that I know who will be speaking for. Okay. And then anyone choosing to speak on this item, you will be given 3 minutes. Then after that, the applicant will be given 3 minutes for rebuttal based on what was heard. And then the final word goes to the appellant, and again, 3 minutes. And then after that, we'll close the public hearing, and we can begin questions of staff and deliberations on our part. Okay? Okay, now with that, let's begin with the appellant. And I'd like to use this opportunity to remind people, when you do get to the podium, if you can state your name and address, it's another reason that we have to identify who's speaking for the record. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and get started while they're passing those along so I don't take too much of your time. My name's Christina Lawson. I'm a land use and environmental attorney with Miller Star Regalia with offices in Walnut Creek and Palo Alto. I'm here tonight representing the appellants, Matt and Catherine Habercorn, who are the owners of 371 Pennsylvania Avenue. To date, this has obviously been a long and difficult process. The properties in this area are both valuable and invaluable. They're located in an area that real estate brokers call one of the prime areas in town. The people that live in the Glen Ridge area do so because it is close to the downtown, but it retains an incomparable neighborhood character. The lots in this area are larger than lots located in other portions of the town. And as you'll see on the attached maps, both the 1892 map, which was pre-Subdivision Map Act and therefore did not create any legal lots, and then a copy of the assessor's parcel map as well, which you can refer to the legend to see how that works, how those lots are characterized. These lots in this neighborhood are larger, and that was by design. With reference to 381 Pennsylvania, the home at 381 Pennsylvania was constructed sometime in the late 1800s. Around the time that map was prepared, the home was purchased by a Frank McCullough for his sister Mary, who lived there until 1939. The property was originally part of the McCullough estate, which also included the home across the street and other properties. And Frank McCullough himself named the streets in the area because he was homesick for his native Pennsylvania. According to the documents in the town's files for the property has been deemed eligible for a local historic designation. That's in addition to the bell ringer plaque that it received. In addition, the property, as you'll see, a copy of which I provided you tonight, is featured on the Hooked on Los Gatos website as a historic property and is on that group's list of historic homes, map of historic homes, excuse me. That website's part of a project of the Los Gatos Public Library and Museums of Los Gatos, and is, quote, in an effort to help Los Gatos residents know and better understand the community's rich heritage. As you know, the property was also awarded a bell ringer plaque in 1987 in recognition of its historic nature. Town staff on page 9 of your staff report acknowledged the historic nature of the property as well. Because the property is clearly historic, the potential environmental impacts of this subdivision must be considered before it can be approved. As you know, as planning commissioners, the CEQA process is not unusual, particularly when there are historic properties, particularly when historic properties are involved. The staff report seems to state that because no changes are proposed to the main residence, we need not consider the environmental impacts of a subdivision proposal on the property. A couple of comments in response to that statement. First, regardless of what the type of proposal is, CEQA requires that environmental review be conducted at the earliest possible time in any project's processing so that environmental impacts can be identified and mitigated. Second, the subdivision here is predetermining a course of action for this property. It's changing the street frontage of the property, installing new drainage systems, transforming a backyard into a corner lot, restricting private open space, in addition to numerous other proposed alterations. And lastly, I provided a copy of the map with some highlighting. It appears that there are changes proposed to the main residence in accordance with this proposal. On the map, which has been highlighted, there's a new second floor addition reference, proposed kitchen expansion reference, a new 10 by 20 parking space, a new driveway, new AC berm per drainage plan, new first floor addition, new grassy swale, and a new junction box. CEQA is very clear with respect to historic properties. It defines a substantial adverse change in the significance of a historic resource to include the following: physical demolition, destruction, relocation, or alteration of a historic resource or its immediate surroundings, all of which are met here, such that the significance of a historical resource would be materially impaired. We actually have no idea whether this resource will be materially impaired because there's been no environmental review conducted whatsoever to date. We note that CEQA expressly precludes use of a categorical exemption, such as the one that's proposed here, for a project with the potential to adversely affect a historic resource. I'd like to point out a couple other of points in my remaining, 30 seconds, that went quickly. The staff report contains no discussion about the easements which run alongside what would be the western boundary of the new parcel fronting on Wissahickon. These easements are held by several different property owners as a result of the town's vacation of the former Laurel Avenue. These are in question. The location of these easements is in question. The proposal also suffers from various technical legal infirmities which clearly preclude its approval. First, the garage is located within the required front yard setback. The town cannot subdivide a lot into two separate parcels if these parcels cannot comply with existing regulations, and it's of no legal consequence that a previous exception to the code requirements has been granted.
Ms. Lawson, that's 5 minutes.
Yes, and I would just like to reference that you do obviously have numerous pages of correspondence from us on this issue, which goes into great detail on all of the points I raised tonight, in addition to others that we've raised previously.
Right. As you mentioned, we do have a thick correspondence, and we welcome that ahead of time because it gives us adequate time to prepare and to digest the information. Commissioners, do you have any questions of Ms. Lawson? Commissioner O'Donnell, yes.
Yes, it's just a question of my interest. I read all of your material, and I'm wondering if, besides what you've raised, and I'm not passing any judgment on that at the moment, is there a unique problem with this proposed subdivision to your client? In other words, I understand the general complaints, procedure, CEQA, all of that. sometimes an appellant has a unique problem with the property, and I'm curious if your client has that unique problem.
That is indeed the case, that the property at 371 Pennsylvania will suffer impacts in addition to the impacts that will be suffered by the greater community in the Glen Ridge area. My client, Matthew Haberforn, is here, and I think he could best address what those particular impacts will be to him.
Since we've said you get 5 minutes, if
Right.
you want to save that for rebuttal, that's fine. If you want to respond to my question now, it allows you to have extra time.
Right.
So
I guess he's part of the appellant.
well, the appellant's time is up, and I'm directing a question to you. If you don't want to answer it,
There are
that's fine.
very unique impacts. In addition to the fact, if you look on the map as to how this property will be located, it is the only property on Pennsylvania that will have a lot essentially located in the backyard of a property, have a new single-family residence located in the backyard of a property. That single-family residence presumably, we don't know right now, will have its frontage on Wissahickon with its backyard facing the backyard of my client's property. In addition, there's that new 10 by 20 parking space that's shown on the proposed map with a new driveway, with a new curb cut and driveway off of Pennsylvania. When you pull into that parking space, if you're a car pulling into that parking space, which does not appear to be covered in that, the lights will be shining directly into a child's bedroom there. So there are some particular impacts of this proposal that would be unique to 371. Those are a couple of examples. You're welcome.
Commissioner Bourgeois, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you for your presentation. And like I said, we do have a lot of background material that we've all gone through. Could you elucidate for me your opinion on why, and I think I heard it, but categorical exemption 15615 is not applicable. What I heard was that because there is a potential impact to a historic resource, you cannot use a categorical exemption. Is that what you're...
I would like to get you the exact citation, so let me just look it up. There are, CEQA's categorical exemptions aren't absolute exemptions. They're subject to a series of exceptions, and if you will just bear with me for one moment, I will find the precise citation in my materials here. It is CEQA Guidelines Section 15300.2F, which provides that a categorical exemption shall not be used for an activity which may cause a substantial adverse change in the significance of a historical resource.
And if I could follow up with that. So you're saying because there hasn't been any evaluation, we don't know whether or not there's an impact?
At this point, we don't know whether or not there will be any change because there's been absolutely no evaluation done of that. What we do know is this property is a historic, both an historic home and a historic property.
And in your opinion, what would the potential impact to that resource be?
There are numerous potential impacts.
Through our action of simply the subdivision.
Well, this subdivision is approving more than just drawing a line on a piece of paper, as you can note from the subdivision proposal. If you read carefully all of the little tiny notations all over it, there's going to be substantial change to the front yard of this property. This property has been a large property since the late 1800s, which is very unique. Essentially, you will be putting a home in the backyard of this property, which has an old barn, a pool, some other improvements in it. All of those will have to be demolished as conditions of approval of this subdivision. In addition, you'll have a new curb cut in the front yard. You'll have a car parking in the front yard behind what was supposedly deemed to be a unique garage at the front because this property, is unique and historic. It's not clear what the impacts of subdividing and allowing a new home to be built on this property. And you're not just allowing a subdivision. This is the first step in development of the property.
Commissioner Johnson.
I'm going to take that as an okay. Am I correct that one of the first things you said, and what I understand from the staff report, is that this house and property has not been officially designated as a historic building or site in the town of Los Gatos? you said it's eligible, you provided us a website, and you continue to describe it anecdotally as historic, but it is not officially designated a historic property. Isn't that right?
That is correct. It has been reviewed by, I'd have to pull out the documentation that I found in the project file, which evaluates it and determines that it is eligible for the local historic designation.
Eligible but not designated.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Okay. Actually, I do have one question of Ms. Lawson. In your presentation, you mentioned something about easements.
Yes.
And you mentioned, is it specific to Wissahickon or to Laurel Lane? Which easements were you specifically referring to?
The easements run across the back of, across the rear of the properties. There are, I believe, are 4 which have those easements, 4 owners across the back of the properties which front on Pennsylvania. It is the former Laurel Avenue.
Okay. And those are private easements?
They are privately held easements that run across multiple properties, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
The town vacated, I would have to say in the 80s, I believe, is when they vacated it.
Okay, thank you. And are there any other questions? Okay, thank you. And again, I do need a speaker card from you before we, okay? And so 5 minutes now by the applicant. And I'll also need one from you. Okay, thank you.
My name is Greg Howell. I live at 125 Glenridge Avenue. We are applying for a minor subdivision. The property for the subdivision was approved at DRC. We're requesting tonight that you upheld that approval. I have not heard any compelling arguments tonight from council that would require you to overturn the approval. I've heard of a bunch of legalese, but the fact of the matter is the property is not designated historic. What I am requesting has been done in this town since the town was created. We are trying to provide shelter to families in this neighborhood, and it's that simple. We are going to be creating a lot in a very desirable neighborhood, walk to town location, walk to schools, and we look forward to providing that to another family to this wonderful neighborhood. One thing that I think needs to be said is we just need to use a little common sense here and look at the application of what we're asking for here. Forget all the legalese of it. We are asking for a minor subdivision. We meet or exceed all town codes. We're not asking for any variances whatsoever. This is a very, very straightforward application, and it really doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. And I would just like to offer myself if you have any questions this evening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howell. Commissioners, do you have any questions of Mr. Howell? Okay, thank you. So with that, I have 4 speaker cards, 5 actually, on agenda item 1. So if anyone else would like to speak, please submit your card. The first one, I'll go ahead and read who's going to come up next and then who'll be after that. The first one will be Carrie Nino. And afterwards, we'll listen from Betty Chase.
Hello, I'm a neighbor in the Glenridge area, and there's plenty of shelter in the walk-to-town distance.
Miss Nino? Miss Nino? If you could just address your comments to us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's plenty of houses for sale. So as far as shelter for walking to town, that's kind of a moot point. There's plenty for sale. And I think the thing that struck me most is that there's really only one reason to subdivide that house and that plot, and it's money. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions of the speaker? Okay. Ms. Betty Chase, and then afterwards, Ms. Lynn Doherty.
Betty Balch Chase, 16121 Woodacres Road in Los Gatos. I grew up in 381 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I guess when I heard about this, I just never thought this would happen. And really, this lot split does not enhance either the lot or the neighborhood. And actually, when my father put in that swimming pool, he leveled the lot. And so it's actually higher at the next door neighbor's fence line. So any structure that's built on that lot is just really going to loom over the next door neighbor. And so, you know, I strongly oppose the lot split. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Lynn Doherty, and then afterwards Donald Warren.
Lynn Doherty, 16678 Magnuson Loop in Los Gatos. I know this piece of property in a couple of ways. One, mostly historic. The historic homes tour from the museum has looked at this piece of property twice in the last 10 years, except for the fact that the owner at that time did not wish it to be shown. It was not, but it certainly, excuse me, would have been chosen because it's a beautiful piece of property. And the house is one thing, but it's the property that makes the whole thing. It's an historic piece of property that we should not let go. I am also a volunteer for the local history project at the library, and I know that 381 is a bell ringer. I know that it was built in 1890, part of the McCulloch Trust. I don't know, there was reference earlier about whether it had been designated historic or not. I'm not quite sure what makes that legal. My understanding is that the Historic Preservation Committee deems any structure in Los Gatos prior to 1941 historic. This certainly qualifies there. It is a bell ringer designated by the Bell Ringer Committee, which is recognized by the museum, of course, and most people here in town. It's part of the Glen Ridge area, which is unique. It's not very unique. It is unique. And I think that we have to be careful about chopping up these parts of town. We have to be careful about letting these pieces of property go because it's part of the ambiance and part of the history of this town that we would really like to preserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, Donald Warren, and then afterwards, John Rocchio. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I'm Donald Warren, a 53-year adult resident of the 95 Wadsworth Avenue, which is just around the corner from the piece of property in question. Recognizing the plat map that was established in the late 19th century, the lots along Pennsylvania were 50-foot wide. This property consists of two adjoining lots. However, the people that, when they settled this property, they had a much warmer appreciation for the area, and they did not divide it up into the 50-foot wide lots, but they combined, they bought and developed property in larger parcels. I recognize that the application here is to divide the property crosswise rather than lengthwise, but it still is diminishing the value of the area, the whole neighborhood. Along with that, the current zoning regulations in that area show that the frontage should be 80 feet wide rather than 50 feet wide, so that's a recognition of the value of keeping larger lot size. Also, when we recognize that the town of Los Gatos developed as a town and not a city, although it operates under the city form of government, it's in keeping with a more comfortable and residential, personalized area. I strongly oppose the application for subdividing this property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Warren. Any questions? So, okay, John Rocchio. Is it Rocchio? Rocchio? Rocchio. And then afterwards, we are Lee Quintana.
Okay, I'm John Rocchio. I live at 369 Pennsylvania Avenue, and I've lived there since 1975. We're two doors down. We're the neighbors to the Abercorns. And I just want to add my name to the list of those vehemently opposed to this project. And I've noticed over the years, the homes that have been rebuilt and modernized, particularly in the years subsequent to the 89 and destructive 89 earthquake, they all were modernized to a high standard. They enhanced value, beauty, charm to the neighborhood. I don't recall any ugly subdivisions in that whole process. Now, I call this an enhancement and a benefit to the community. What's being proposed today, this subdivision, it isn't an enhancement. You know, I think it lowers property values. It has a lot of negatives. You know,
skipping the legalese. In my view, it's a negative impact both to the charm of the neighborhood as well as the property values. So the only benefit I see is to the applicant developer, and that if he's allowed to subdivide this property, then he'll be able to flip 2 properties, and that's, I'm sure, has more value than the single property that's there now. My parting observation is that in Los Gatos, it's sometimes a near hanging offense if you want to cut down a mature tree. Now, I would ask the Commission to take the same zeal and high standard in protecting and preserving what has been described very eloquently here today as our jewel. We can't get it back. Once it's chopped up, it's gone. And there's a few things that make Los Gatos unique in the place it is, and it's been described. And it is what it is. It's a special place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the speaker? Okay, and our final speaker card is from Ms. Quintana. And again, if anyone would like to speak on Agenda Item 1, just please submit a card.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue, Los Gatos. I'd like to say that I have never met the appellant or never talked to him. And I'd also like to say that I concur with the legalese that the appellant's lawyer talked about in terms of categorical exemptions and doing CEQA at the first possible stage of potential impact. And I say that as a professional environmental, not consultant, but preparer and checker of environmental impact reports in the past. Having said that, I also lived at 363 Pennsylvania Avenue in the past, and I'd like to talk about common sense. Common sense. This is part of a historic subdivision that essentially has maintained its form for over 100 years. Common sense is if you're going to divide a property and you look at the proposed T-map, tentative map, it's clear that the property can't be developed without changes to the rear property, and that it doesn't even make sense to determine where that lot line is going to be if you assume that the pool's going to be there, because that constricts what can be done with the subdivision, even if you approve it, which I don't think you should. The question of historic, it's eligible for historic designation as a local landmark. The work to determine that has never been done. If you don't do it before you subdivide it, you have already lessened the chance of it getting that kind of designation for the site because it's gone. Logic, the plan shows that there are going to be changes to the house. The driveway, from my understanding, for the second car is not required but encouraged, and that changes the front considerably. Logic, why was the neighborhood that was picked out to compare whether it's compatible with the neighborhood designated as that? Why wasn't it closer to what is in the residential design guidelines, or even just looking at the historic subdivision or the houses along Pennsylvania on both sides rather than way back on Walnut? So I would ask you not to approve it.
Thank you, Ms. Quintana. Any questions of Ms. Quintana? Okay, thank you. Okay, so at this time, we get a rebuttal by the applicant. So, Mr. Howell, you have 3 minutes to rebut anything you may have heard.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank all the neighbors who wrote letters of support for this project. I think there were somewhere around 10 or 11, 12 neighbors who wrote letters of support for the subdivision, but couldn't be here this evening. This is a wonderful house. This is a wonderful property. There's no doubt about it. I wouldn't have bought it if I didn't think the house was a wonderful structure. We're not proposing any changes to the house with this application. If I understand that the historic designation would be on the land itself, because all we're asking to do is to subdivide the property. If that were the case, every piece of land in this valley would be considered historic potentially because it's been here for many, many years. The historic nature of this property is not going to be changed at all. On the lot that we will be creating, there is a rather large pool on it that was built in the 50s. There's a pool house that was built in the 50s, and there is a barn that was built in the 50s, none of which qualify for any historic designation based on town standards. I share the concerns that these neighbors have with the historic nature of the Glen Ridge neighborhood. I live there. I enjoy living there, and the last thing I would want to do is to create anything that would change the character of this neighborhood. This application clearly does not do that, and I really look forward to your support tonight and would like to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. Do I have any Commissioner Bourgeois?
Thank you, Mr. Howell. So I'm just confused about the, as outlined on the tentative map, the new driveway, the new first floor addition, the new second floor addition that are outlined, and you say you're not making any changes to the structure. Could you maybe talk us through those elements and why they're on the tentative map?
Yes. When I originally purchased the property, I planned on moving in the house. And personal level, my wife did not want to move off Glen Ridge, so we decided to not move into the house. Those are the changes that I was going to do to the house. They are not part of this application any longer. The driveway we were asked to put in by staff to create another parking spot for the guest house. If the community would rather see that not put in, I support that. And if they'd like to see that removed, I do support that. I'll leave that up to the staff and to the neighbors.
Any other questions, Mr. Howell? Okay, thank you. Okay, and at this time, we have 3-minute rebuttal by the appellant.
Good evening. When we bought this property 2.5 years ago, I'm sorry, it's Matt Habercorn. We own 371 Pennsylvania, myself and my wife. When we bought 371 Pennsylvania Avenue, we were buying a 17,000 plus square foot lot with a 4,000 plus square foot home with privacy. Both open space, one thing no one's mentioned, is in the rear of these properties. There's 4 or 5 properties that back up to Laurel Avenue. If you look at those properties, there's a big open creek where there's deer, coyotes, much to people's chagrin, in the evening that come around. But that is what creates a unique open space for us. We don't see the neighbors behind us that are actually up above probably 50 feet across the ravine. The ravine is privately owned. It's downhill from the water, from California Water, or Cal Water Company. So I'm not sure of the environmental impact of putting a home now back in the rear of my yard. But clearly, as we've heard from the prior resident of 381, when the pool was built, the property at 381 is probably 5 to 7 feet higher than my backyard. So with the height requirements or the zoning ordinance that requires a home that can go up to 30 feet, I might have a home that's 35 to 37 feet next door looking right into my backyard. So what I've heard tonight is a lot of people talking about negative impact to the neighborhood. The only one that it truly negatively impacts directly is I'm going to have a 2-story home without a doubt, looking down into my backyard, looking into all my windows, which I didn't buy 2.5 years ago. And Miss Manson, the prior owner, would probably be rolling over in her grave if she knew that a developer bought this to try and flip it. The reason that he's taken the plans off, although let me just add one thing. The map that he's seeking to get approval in the subdivision actually shows these changes to the historical home, to the bell ringer. To now come before the Planning Commission and say, well, approve it, but that was something that I wanted, but my wife didn't want to move into the home. That's not before the Planning Commission. Clearly what happened was he went in, wanted to change the house. He was told no by the planning department. Then he went ahead and said, I want to do a lot line adjustment because of this 1892 map, which doesn't comply with the Subdivision Map Act. And he wanted to move it. The original lot line went from Pennsylvania to the back, to this creek. He wanted to move it. And in fact, in the middle of the night, at some point in time, or when I was out of town, there's a fence constructed across his property, blocking off this pool and the cottage and the barn. So it was at that point that we engaged in some conversation. What are your intentions? It went from it was only, I believe, after we retained counsel that he decided I can't do a lot line adjustment per Marnie Mosley from the planning department, that he went in and said, I want to do a subdivision. And we have complained from day one that it's not a proper subdivision application. It's just been modified, pay a little bit more. And as he wants to say, and as a few people have said, let's forget about the legalese. Well, when the law is on your side, you argue the law. When the facts are on your side, you argue the facts. He wants to forget about the legalese, but I believe that everyone in this town that has any decision-making process or decision-making approval here has to follow the law,
Okay.
and then look at the facts.
Mr. Haberkorn, thank you.
Well, let me just add one thing.
I'm sorry,
we have
but
to look
it's
at
been
community
3
benefit.
minutes.
We
Mr.
haven't heard
Haberkorn,
one thing about community benefit.
If we have further questions, we can ask you of community benefits, but we've been very clear on the time allotments. So,
It's interesting that time allotment. I don't see anything in the town code about
Mr.
time
Haberkorn, your
allotments.
3 minutes is up. Okay?
Tell me
Now,
where
if
that
there's-
is. Tell me where that is in the town code about time allotments on an appeal. You
There-
guys have the
where
right
it
to make a
is-
decision
If you would like to where it
impact me
is-
negatively based on 3 minutes. Tell me where that is in the town code. This is something that you guys sent out to my council a couple of days ago, setting time limits. Tell me where that is in the town code, that 5 or 6 people can negatively impact my property and potentially
Mr.
take away millions of
Haberkorn,
dollars from my family.
You're asking a question you're not giving me an opportunity to answer. We have a process that we dictate to all appeals. That has been shared with you. That has been shared with the applicant. This is the process we follow. We have been following it since I've been on the commission. And that's the process we're going to follow. We can ask you these questions. You've submitted documentation. Give us that opportunity. I understand you're frustrated, but we want to make sure that we follow this in a diligent process without making it any more unpleasant than it could be.
I'm just curious where it's written about the time limits. It's written when you go to
It's
court
chairperson
about time
discretion,
limits.
and this is what I've decided our process will be today. It's the process that other people have followed before me.
So when we were here 2 weeks ago, it was not your decision. It was Mr. Bourgeois that could say, I want to limit this to 3
He was
minutes
the
or 8 minutes.
chairperson at that time, and yes, and I'm not going to argue this any further.
I'm
Now,
not arguing. I'm
commissioners,
just trying to ask you where the
do
law
you have any
is.
other questions, Mr. Haberkorn? Okay. Well,
But
thank you.
I want to add one
And
thing
we're-
to the record.
And
that's
okay,
fine. You
we
can
are-
talk over me. I'm going to talk over you. Let me just tell you one thing. Only one person
Okay,
visited
let's
my
take a
property.
5-minute recess. Okay, I am now opening, we are now back to the meeting, but I am closing the public hearing. And commissioners, I apologize for that interruption, but we are going to continue as the process that I've dictated earlier. And just to make sure that it is very clear that I do have discretion as chairperson to dictate the process that we are following. As I mentioned earlier, there's a process that we have been following for the past 5 years that I have been on, and that process is the same process that we have used. And I've just been assured by our legal counsel that I am legally entitled to that discretion, okay? Now, that being said, we're closing the public hearing, and I would like to begin discussion of this application. Before we do that, there are a couple of things that I'd like to point out from the staff report. I'm specifically looking at pages 5 and 6 that contain 5 and 6 of the staff report. And just a reminder to my commissioners as well as the public that this application is a little different in that the Subdivision Map Act has 7 specific findings that must be made in order to deny an application. In the past, we've needed to make findings to approve. This is the opposite. There are 7 specific findings that have to be found before we can deny it. And so, for the record, I know it's stated in our staff report and written Many people have those copies, but for the record, I am going to read those 7 findings. And after each one, I'll just look up if there's anything that you would like to comment on or discuss on after I make each finding. Just let me know, raise your hand. And then after those 7 findings are read, then we can begin our discussion and deliberation. Okay? Okay. So the first is that the proposed map is not consistent with applicable general and specific plans as specified in section 65451. The second finding, that the design or improvement of the proposed subdivision is not consistent with applicable general and specific plans. The third is that the site is not physically suitable for the type of development. The fourth is that the site is not physically suitable for the proposed density of development. The next finding is that the design of the subdivision or the proposed improvements are likely to cause substantial environmental damage or substantially and avoidably injure fish or wildlife or their habitat. The next is that the design of the subdivision or type of improvements is likely to cause serious public health problems. And the last finding is that the design of the subdivision or the type of improvements will conflict with easements acquired by the public at large for access through or use of property within the proposed subdivision. These are the findings that we need to consider as we consider this application. There are a lot of information that was given to us. A lot of that has to be addressed at other points, but tonight we're strictly looking at the subdivision. So with that, I'd like to see if anyone has any general comments or specific comments to any of these findings. Commissioner Erickson.
I guess it would be helpful at this point or at the right moment for the staff to review the easement question for us so we'd have be sure we have a clear understanding of the easements that are involved and how that relates to the last of the findings.
Yeah, I can discuss that briefly. On the tentative map, if you're looking at the tentative map, it's Exhibit 11. On the left-hand side of the property, it's the old Laurel Avenue, Laurel Lane. The 20 feet wide ingress and egress easement is the private easement for the adjacent properties. This proposal does nothing to impede or change the use of that easement. There's also an easement when the right-of-way for Laurel Avenue was vacated. We retained a public utility easement across that, and that's identified in this easement and on this map as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Erickson, did you have more questions? Okay, Commissioner Johnson.
I just want to confirm my understanding of the 7th finding regarding the easements with our town council, or town attorney, I should say. As I read the finding, it is specific to easements acquired by the public at large for access through or use of the property, and I am reading that as excluding private easements across the property. Is that correct?
Something that I think there may be, it wouldn't be inclusive of private easements if you were to somehow try to landlock a parcel so that you wouldn't impede access to the parcel from a private side. The rest of it, I think, speaks to public easements, but maybe this prop can confirm that.
So generally, this was placed in there that it's typically exactly as it states acquired by the public at large. However, if you were to be able to make findings that it would be a landlocked parcel or in any way interfere with a private easement, then staff would have commented and brought that forward if that were the case in this matter.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I, too, would like to direct a question to the town attorney. We've heard a lot of very good remarks, intelligent remarks, and questions. Having looked at all of this, and there's quite a bit here, it does appear that perhaps we have two questions. One is the application of the categorical exemption, which I consider, generally speaking, a legal issue. Granted, a categorical exemption has to fit certain facts. But we have opinion of counsel, I believe, here, our attorney, that says it does fit the categorical exemption. Secondly, the only way we can turn this down is to be able to make one of the findings that the chair just read. And so the reason I'm reciting this again is a number of important issues were raised. However, one of the things that I've learned in a long time is you ought to follow the advice of your own attorney. And the advice of our attorney on the legal matters is clear. Obviously, it's at variance with the applicant's, the appellant's attorney. But I will follow the advice of our attorney. I personally could not make any of those 7 findings. And unless I can make those findings, it gets approved almost. It just gets approved because the legislature said you must approve it unless you can find one or more of these. So I think we don't get to say, as people have argued, we think it'd be nicer for the neighborhood, all those things. We just don't get to do that because if we did, we would be making these decisions sort of ad hoc as we go. We don't get to do that. We're supposed to follow the law. So my question, I guess, to the attorney then is, do I correctly understand your advice that you believe it does indeed fit under the categorical exemption, and that, in fact, unless we can make one of those 7 findings, we must approve the subdivision?
Subdivision Map Act provides that for subdivisions of less than 4 lots are eligible for a categorical exemption. You've heard additional information provided in the staff report that also supports the categorical exemption in this case. You are correct, Commissioner O'Donnell, that that the Commission has to make a factual finding on any of the 7 items in order to overturn the decision of the Development Review Committee based on the facts that have been presented to you both in writing and in public this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Ogle?
Yes, I have a question just of exactly as the new person on the commission. With this approval, if we approve this, are we approving the subdivision and that lot line, or are we approving this tentative map with the improvements that are shown?
The tentative map is technically the first step in the subdivision process. A final map will then be recorded through engineering with the county. No. So, okay.
Okay.
The additions that are shown on the map, is that what your
yes, that what your that's what I'm specifically asking about.
No, those are just, staff has an application on hand, and we had to have that information included on the map if that were to ever be recorded to ensure that that the proposed lot line would continue to provide the required setback for the addition that was proposed on hand. That addition has been put on hold and may never happen. The subdivision map does not include that. It's only in regards to the location of the lot line.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Erickson?
Can I ask a follow-up clarification? So the action of the DRC to approve the subdivision, was part of that action predicated on the additions that have now been withdrawn, so that the approval, in essence, of the DRC included those? That's what I'm asking. Or were they removed before or after? Were they withdrawn before or after the approval of the DRC? So if we were to take action to not approve the appeal, would that be tantamount to approving the map with the additions on it?
No, the additions are part of what is called a minor residential application. It was submitted prior to the subdivision application, and as such, that information is shown on the map. The subdivision application is solely the subdivision application, and that is all that was approved at the Development Review Committee.
Commissioner Jensen?
beating a dead horse, but making sure. The only action that is before the commission tonight, as I understand it, is whether to make one lot 2 lots. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then that we, according to the Subdivision Map Act, the Planning Commission shall not deny the application unless one of the 7 findings can be made, correct?
Correct.
And that if the 1 lot becomes 2 lots, any further application for the use of that property will have to come back before the Planning Commission. Is that correct?
It's not required to come back before the Planning Commission, but you can condition that. The Development Review Committee does have the ability to approve that application.
But we could, if there were a motion to be made one way or the other tonight, let's say that the motion was made to approve the subdivision, that motion could be conditioned upon any further application or plans for that property coming back before either the Planning Commission, the Historic Preservation Committee, whoever it might be. Is that correct?
Generally, the MAP Act does not allow for conditions on a subdivision of this nature. So while Planning Commission could ask staff to bring it back, and staff has the ability to refer a matter from DRC to Planning Commission, it can't be a condition of this map. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Could I follow up on that? If we didn't condition it and it came before the DRC, is that an appealable decision?
Yes, it is a public hearing process, just like the Planning Commission, and it would be appealable.
So that even if we were not to condition it, if someone were unhappy, which may indeed be the case, they would have 2 bites at the apple because they could appeal from DRC rather than simply coming in the first instance before the Planning Commission. Is that correct?
That's correct. And also would like to point out that the process allows staff to bring it directly to the Planning Commission. Even though it is eligible for a DRC review, that is staff's discretion, and while you can't condition the applicant in the map, certainly comments tonight could certainly give staff direction of your sentiments on that issue. Any other questions? And I do have one more question. I understand the nature of historic preservation with the house on the parcel 1 being historic, not necessarily the land. Any further improvements to the current house on 381, that will go to historic preservation?
The proposed improvements actually were reviewed by the HPC back in July, and they were approved, recommended for approval. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
So was that formally withdrawn, the application for those improvements?
No, it was not. It was just told staff that they were putting it on hold.
So if we were to approve the subdivision this evening and the applicant were to come in to pursue those improvements to what I'll call lot number 1, where are we on that, or where are you on that?
The application was fully reviewed by staff. The next step would have been for story poles to be constructed and for us to notify the neighbors.
And after it was story poled and the neighbors were notified, where did it go?
Based on information received through the public notification process, that would determine whether or not the application would be approved or whether it would be forwarded to the Planning Commission.
Well, what I guess I'm asking you is who would approve it?
It is a staff level approval.
The staff level?
I'm
Staff
sorry.
level?
Correct. The planning director would.
But if somebody, let me ask this clear too, when do you decide if one neighbor objects, it goes on, or what?
If we receive
neighborhood opposition, we encourage the applicant and the neighbor to work together to try to come to a resolution. If no resolution can become, we then would forward the matter on to the Planning Commission.
Obviously, the reason I'm asking the question is Mr. Haberkorn is shocked if he approved anything that is proposed on that house. But what I guess I'm hearing you say is it's possible, unless there were significant neighborhood opposition, that it might simply be decided by staff not even a committee. Is that correct?
The HPC did review the plans for the proposed addition, and they did not have any concerns in regards to the proposal.
Okay, one last question. That was last pursued in June?
I believe the meeting was July 26th or something like that, late July.
And whatever was being, you said was approved by the historical committee, but the next step then would be the staff approval. Is that, or the DRC?
Correct. The first step is HPC reviewing it, and they make a motion to recommend that the director approves the application. And then we would have the story poles put up, and we would notify the neighbors and give them 10 days to provide comments and come in and look at the plan, similar to an appeal process.
The reason I'm asking the question is there's been discussion of the height of the lot and the potential impact on the neighbor, and I believe that we will get a chance to review that and condition that and avoid, hopefully, those kind of problems. But I'm trying to ascertain, I guess whatever we decide tonight has nothing to do with what went on with the improvements on the house. So if we said no tonight, it wouldn't make any difference. If we said yes tonight, it wouldn't make any difference. Whatever was approved by you on those improvements in the existing property has nothing to do with tonight's subdivision.
Correct. All this before you is the subdivision.
Thank you.
Do I have any other comments or questions?
Can I just ask one more question?
Of course.
When this was all discussed, was the subdivision in the process as well? Was the Historic Preservation Committee aware of that?
I'm not sure whether they were aware of it because it is not under their purview for them to review the subdivision. I believe we possibly had it on file, but it was in the beginning stages. I think it was still a certificate of compliance proposal at that time, which staff actually directed the applicant to start with because we wanted to ensure that there wasn't a remaining lot line on the property that could then later be recognized. So we actually directed the applicant to begin with a certificate of compliance lot line adjustment and then follow up with a subdivision if that was not the appropriate procedure.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I want to follow up on that too. It would disturb me, I think, if I felt that what we're going through this evening, which is difficult, I believe, if we nevertheless go through that and, let's assume for the moment, approve the subdivision, this other application, which is sitting out there somewhere, just simply goes through. So I guess, let me see if I can get counsel to help me on this one. Is there anything we can do to see that the requested improvements on the existing house, requested improvements, the staff and or the planning commissioner, somebody, gets to review that request in light of what we're doing this evening? It isn't crystal clear to me that when this was done in the first instance, everything we've now gone through was available. So that's the question.
So if Planning Commission took action tonight on the project before you, Planning Commission could also make recommendations to staff to refer any applications regarding modifications to the existing structure back to HPC. You could certainly ask staff, you could request the director to consider moving any further application that may be eligible for staff level or DRC review, that all matters be returned to Planning Commission for consideration regarding any structures. It's still within staff's discretion, but as the commission as well as the community knows, is that staff would take to heart the concerns of the community as the you heard from planning staff that typically when there has been opposition or continued opposition to a project, staff usually refers the matter back to Planning Commission. And certainly given the amount of concern by the neighborhood, both at the DRC as well as tonight, if the community stayed involved, then the staff would take that under consideration.
Do I have any other questions, commissioners? Okay, that being said, as we've discussed and we've heard a lot of information tonight. And again, we have to narrow our focus on the actual subdivision that's before us. We can make recommendations, and it sounds like I hear several recommendations that are being, it sounds like we have consensus on how we would like recommendations to move, but I am looking to you guys for a motion on the actual subdivision. Would anyone care to take a shot at that? Commissioner Jensen.
I'm going to try a motion and reiterate that our purview tonight is very limited. If I look at the staff report, which many of you may have copies of or may not, it lists for us findings that are required in order to make any kind of motion on this. The first one is that we must find under Section 15615 of the State Environmental Guidelines, as adopted by the town, that this project is categorically exempt from basically secret requirements. Based upon all the information that we've received from the staff, the community, the public hearing tonight, the submissions by both appellant and applicant, and the advice we received from council, and I would point to particularly that subdivisions less than 4 are entitled to a categorical exemption, that although we've heard argument that the property is eligible for some type of historic designation, or we have been referred to newspaper articles or websites regarding a historic nature, it certainly hasn't been designated such that that would trigger an exemption or trigger a reason to take this application out of the categorical exemption that it would otherwise be entitled to. So I believe that we can make a finding that under Section 15615 that it is indeed categorically exempt. The next issue is we must find that the application is consistent with the general plan. The appellant has cited in very many letters to us various issues with general plan that the appellant believes are not consistent with this property. However, overall, based on all the material we've received and the recent general plan modifications and the nature of this particular one lot into 2 lots on very, very large lots, very much larger than what we normally consider, I don't think we can find that the project is inconsistent as would be required under the Subdivision Map Act. So I'm sort of doing this in reverse and indicating for purposes of the motion that the application is consistent. We next need to make the findings under the State Subdivision Map Act, or more properly, we need to not make the findings. And I'm going to repeat for the record for the motion what we would, the nature of the Subdivision Map Act as has been explained tonight. The state law says that the deciding body shall not deny an application for a subdivision unless one of the 7 findings can be made. And Commissioner Sayak went over those, so I don't want to repeat them again tonight, but well, I guess I can repeat them very, very quickly. The first one is that the map is not consistent with the general plan, and specific plans I've indicated that it is. The second one is essentially the same finding but not limited by a code section. That the code section in the first one is section 65451. The third is that the site is not physically suitable for the type of development. I don't think we've heard actually an argument from appellant or anyone in opposition or contained in the staff report that actually the lot is not physically suitable. The site is not physically suitable for proposed density. The lots are well over the zoning size, so the density is not inappropriate. Fifth, that the subdivision or the proposed improvements are likely to cause substantial environmental damage or substantially and avoidably injure fish or wildlife in their habitat. I don't think we've heard anything that would support a finding of that. That the subdivision or type of improvement is likely to cause serious public health problems. I don't think there's been anyone contending that that's the case. And finally, that the design of the subdivision or the type of improvement will conflict with the easements acquired by the public at large for access through or use of the property. This would not be landlocked property, which, if it were subdivided, there are no easements that are acquired by the public at large, so I don't think the Commission can make that finding either. Finally, we would need to find that the subdivision is consistent with the redevelopment plan for the Los Gatos redevelopment project area. I don't think we've heard an argument beyond the general plan sections that were cited by appellant in his many letters regarding specifically the redevelopment plan. I don't recall seeing any of those. So I do think that based on our staff report and the information we have in front of us, that we can find that the project is consistent with the Los Gatos redevelopment project area. Finally, I would make a specific recommendation, and if I can even make a direction, I think I can, as long as it's not a condition of the motion, that if this motion is approved, that any proposal for a change, modification, improvement, driveway, swale, landfill, future plans for a second house, or any modification to the existing house. On the existing house, though it's not designated historic, it is, as council pointed out, pre-1941, and by Los Gatos Town Code, a house built before pre-1941, even though not historic per se, needs to come through the Historic Preservation Committee for review. So any kind of improvement or modification to a pre-1941 house technically would need to come back to Historic Preservation. So I would highly recommend that staff bring any proposal with respect to that first house back to Historic Preservation, and that Historic Preservation's recommendation, if any, come direct to Planning Commission, not go to DRC, and that any kind of proposal with respect to this property be the subject of a public hearing at the Planning Commission, so that everyone interested in any development of this property can be properly heard. And that's my motion.
We have a motion by Commissioner Jensen. Do I have a second on this motion with a recommendation? Commissioner O'Donnell, do you have a question? Or?
I have a question, and I believe I'm going to second it. In the latter part of that motion, you first said a direction, you subsequently said a recommendation. I take it is a request and recommendation as opposed to a direction?
I would like it to be a direction, but I'm getting kind of a funny look from our council, so if I can't have it be a direction, then it's a very, very strong recommendation.
I will second the motion on that basis.
Okay. So I have a motion to deny the appeal with a strong recommendation and a second by Commissioner O'Donnell. Are there any comments that anyone would like to discuss before I call the question? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to the motion? So that's 6-0. And Ms. Bailey, are there appeal rights on this matter?
Yes, there is. An appeal of this decision may be filed in the town clerk's office. The appeal period is 10 days, and there is a fee for filing an appeal.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. Thank you for everyone in attendance. We are now moving on to item number 2. Okay. Agenda item 2 is Planned Development PD-10-002, an Environmental Impact Report EIR-10-001, located at 20 Ditto's Lane. Before I begin, I just want to remind the public, as well as the commissioners, that this public hearing is just to provide verbal comments on the draft environmental impact report before us. Okay? Staff is not prepared to answer any questions or comments, and anything that is said tonight will be recorded, will be written, and will be responded to at our, I believe we are going to have a study session on February 23, is that correct? So I just want to remind the public to ensure that no one is expecting any responses to any of the questions that you may pose to us tonight. You will be getting those at a later time. Commissioner Bourgeois.
Could you check the date on? I thought the study session was on the 9th.
We'll go through the revised schedule.
Okay.
Originally it was the 9th. It is now the 2/23, and the response to comments will actually be in the form of the response to comments, which will become the final EIR, which will be addressed prior to the tentatively scheduled March 9th public hearing before the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Jensen.
Just a clarification that the period to comment on the draft EIR goes until February 4th. That isn't changed.
That has not changed.
Okay. And I hope we didn't steal your thunder, Mr. Paulson, but I do believe you have a staff presentation for us.
Well, I can go ahead and repeat myself on a couple of the issues, but that's quite all right.
You.
Good evening, Chair Sayoc, commissioners, members of the public. As has been stated, draft EIR has been prepared for this Ditto's Lane Apartments project. The draft EIR was released on December 21st, and as previously stated, the public review period for comments goes through February 4th, 2011. And again, to restate, the purpose of this public hearing is only to provide an opportunity for members of the public to provide verbal and/or drop-off written comments on the adequacy and completeness of the draft EIR. We will not be discussing the project this evening specifically. And additionally, written comments can be submitted to the town up until 5 p.m. on February 4th, and those again will be addressed in the final EIR. The draft EIR is an informational document that looks at the environmental impacts associated with the proposed project. It helps inform the town, the public, and the decision makers of the significant environmental impacts of the proposed project. The draft EIR also describes 4 alternatives, the first being the no project alternative, secondly the off-site alternative, the reduced density alternative, and then lastly a modified design alternative. All but one of the potentially significant impacts will be reduced to a less than significant level by the implementation of the proposed mitigation measures. The one significant impact that will not be able to be reduced to a significant level is related to historical resources, and information on that is available in the draft EIR. The draft EIR is one piece of information that will be considered by the decision makers in their review of the proposed project, and the findings in the draft EIR do not mandate a specific decision on the proposed project, nor does it act as a recommendation for the project. The decision on the project will be based on the merits of the proposed project and the total record of which the draft EIR will be one piece. Following this public hearing and the close of the 45-day public review period for the draft EIR, which is on February 4th, the staff and town consultants will respond to all the testimony received this evening and written comments that are relative to the draft EIR. Responses to those comments will be provided in the form of a final environmental impact report, which will include any necessary revisions to the draft EIR that result from the written and/or public testimony comments that are received. The Commission is going to hold a study session on February 23rd. As noted previously, we were hoping to get it on the February 9th meeting. That was not able to happen, so the schedule has been slightly revised. So that study session will happen, and that we will specifically be talking about the proposed project at that meeting. Subsequently, we will have a public hearing before the Planning Commission on March 9th, which is the tentative date. And there, they'll be considering the proposed project, draft EIR, response to comments on the draft EIR, and then ultimately making a recommendation to the Town Council. The Town Council is tentatively scheduled to hear this matter on April 4th, and then following that, the project, the plan development, and will an action will be taken on the plan development, and certification will or won't be made on the environmental impact report. As stated previously, this public hearing is only intended to provide an opportunity for the public to provide verbal or written comments on the completeness of the draft EIR, and this public hearing is not intended to or for the consideration of the proposed project, nor is it the actual certification of the draft EIR. And that concludes staff's comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Bourgeois.
Sorry, just to be clear on the process. So at the March 9th meeting, we will be making recommendations both on the EIR and the proposed project.
That is the proposed schedule.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the process? Okay. With that, I will open the public comment portion. As a reminder, you have 3 minutes to speak, and we do ask that as you approach the podium that you state your name and address. All comments will be written by staff, and again, all responses, should you need one, will be provided at the next workshop, okay? We have several speakers cards. I have 16, so if you would like to speak and haven't provided one, please do so and submit them. The first speaker will be Andrew Wu, and afterwards it'll be Chris Bevis. There's no Andrew? Okay. Chris Bevis. And then afterwards, Gail Nishimura.
Hi, my name is Chris Bevis, 81 College Avenue. I'd like to provide some context on the process that led to the creation of this EIR and some of our concerns about the process going forward for both reviewing the EIR and for reviewing the project as a whole. From our perspective, the town bought the land without any public involvement and negotiated a very specific deal with Rome for this site, also without any public involvement. The first meeting about this project, many of us in the neighborhood, including my wife and myself, who live directly across College Avenue from the project site, were not invited or notified of the meeting. We definitely get the feeling like we're kind of being railroaded here. And I realize that the town government really wants to do this project. Everyone we've met with from both town staff and government has been a strong advocate for the project. And I fear that the town's role both as advocate for the project and the reviewing body of the EIR and the proposed development creates a conflict of interest. And in particular, I fear that, I hope it's not the case, but that the town intends to rubber stamp this at every phase of the development process, including the EIR. The EIR itself conflicts with the views of anyone who lives in the neighborhood or anyone who uses the neighborhood recreationally or the business owners in the neighborhood. The comments about traffic, character of the neighborhood, density, et cetera, are really glossed over in the report. And I think that the town really needs to look at this EIR very critically and objectively and not be swayed by kind of a desire to do good by developing affordable housing or by getting redevelopment funds. This should really be a project that's done for the benefit of the community, not to get money for the town. I would urge you to consider alternatives as well as you review the EIR. It was presented to us that this was the only plan that was going to be considered. The density was already fixed, the design was already fixed, and it was just an up or down vote and no alternatives would be considered, and I don't think that's appropriate. I would encourage you to look at reducing the number of units and the bulk of the project to mitigate some of the negative impacts, and also make it consistent with the density in the residential neighborhood on College Avenue. I would also strongly consider, or urge you to consider, making this mixed income instead of all very low income housing, so the teachers, firefighters, and police officers would be eligible for at least some of the units. And also to develop high-density housing in areas other than this area where the infrastructure and the environment is more suitable for it. Lastly, let me say that I think all of my neighbors strongly support the development of affordable housing in the community, including on this site. And I think we'd have exactly the same objections if you were going to build 32 luxury apartments here. Other proposals to development have been denied for good reason, and I think this one should be as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bevis. Gail Nishimura, and afterwards it'll be Jack Van Nada.
Hello, my name is Gail Nishimura, and I live at 81 College Avenue.
And in reviewing the EIR, I have quite a few concerns about the analysis that was done. First of all, I do want to talk about page 2-1, section 2.1, that talks about how Los Gatos usually only has allowable densities of 24 persons per acre. Allowed densities for R1D are usually 5 to 12 dwellings per acre. But for Dittos, we're looking at an average of 21.5 units per acre. And I would ask us to consider, when the number was decided of 24 persons per acre, and now we're looking at 64, because 16 one-bedrooms, 16 two-bedrooms, 24 persons per acre, that was determined due to some kind of acceptable level of noise, odor, traffic, etc. But now we're thinking that substantially increasing that by 2.6x is acceptable. Why do we suddenly ignore the requirements? Another point I'd like to make is on page 2-5, section 4.8-5. Project implementation will result in traffic increases in local roadways, other roadways less than significant. I'm puzzled by this analysis when we are looking at potential for 60-plus people coming out of an already crowded intersection. As anybody knows who's tried to go down Main Street during peak hours, anything in front of the schools, it's very tight as it is, and having even 60-plus more drivers coming out in the peak time is going to be significantly affecting the community and the surrounding businesses. Also, there's a comment on page 2-6, section 4.9-3, operation of the proposed apartments would result in noise increases from residential activities less than significant. Again, how is this considered less than significant when you're talking about over 90 people potentially being in this very small area? Of course there's going to be more noise, and I do not deem that as less than significant. Page 2-7, section 4.10-4, also deemed less than significant. Operation of the proposed project would have the potential to generate odors. Again, you have a great density amount of people who are living there. They have balconies to barbecue on. I think that, yes, you are going to have a more than less than significant. So I would just say that I think there needs to be much more serious consideration of having that many people in a small area, such it is, impact on the neighborhood and the community and the character of the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Jack Venata, and then afterwards it looks like Joel, how would you say, Aso?
My name is Jack Van Nate. I live at 165 Euclid Avenue. I, for one, when I went through the table of contents, it was difficult for me to figure this out. I found chapters 1 through 3, but I was looking particularly for the impact of transportation and traffic, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find, I believe it's Appendix H also. At least it wasn't online. There were 48 pages. I typed out all 48, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So if I could get that somehow, that would be appreciated. I, too, like Mr. Beavis, kind of had the feeling that this was somewhat of a slam dunk, the way that this was being presented, that thank you very much. It's nice to hear what we have to say, but this is a done deal. Hoping that that's not the case, I'm very concerned about the traffic. I'm a 35-year resident of the same house, and have watched the intersection of East Main and College continually get tougher to get out of. At one time they were going to put a stoplight there, then they went to a stop sign. Very difficult to get out of it. Anybody that travels in that area at 8 o'clock, 11:30, or about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're just jammed with traffic. You have to figure on going the opposite way, or you try to set your schedule. Fortunately, I'm retired, but you set your schedule so that you don't hit those peak traffic times. You also have trucks that unload in the morning right there at College and Main, both on East Main and on College, making it now a one-lane road. It was said that the traffic would be insignificant. I heartily disagree with that. With 80 people moving in there and the potential of 30, 60 cars, something like that, I think it's going to be a jam if people make 2 trips a day in and out of there. Second thing is it said it was insignificant as far as the amount of the pedestrian or bicycle traffic. If you live on College Avenue or Jones Road, which my house is actually on Jones Road also, the public now considers College and Jones as large sidewalks. We have to drive up, often with 3 to 4 bicycles abreast or 2 to 3 pedestrians. So it's getting more and more difficult to get up to the Novitiate Park. Great park. I don't know, not too many people know I'm the garbage man up there. I take the garbage out of the park. And that's fine. It keeps the park cleaner, but we are getting a lot of people. We had a group, just one group of 75 up there this weekend. That's a lot of cars and a lot of people. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Joel Ash.
Yes, my name is Joel Ash. I'm at 83 College Avenue. I'm a 34-year resident of that property. And I've seen a lot of changes on College Avenue in the last 34 years. I'd like to comment specifically about Appendix H, which deals with traffic impact study for Ditto Lane's apartments completed on 9/2/2010. It says, the introduction and summary, the proposed project is expected to generate 16 trips, 3 inbound and 13 outbound trips during the peak hours and 20 trips during the PM peak hours. So the first was AM, this is the PM. Based on the 24-hour average daily traffic report, which you provided, the peak hours bi-directional traffic on Main Street west of Maple is approximately 905 vehicles per hour. 905 vehicles an hour. I'd like to respond to that. These numbers regarding peak hours trips between the apartments and Main Street grossly underestimate the numbers of trips which will actually be made by the Ditto Lane residents. Why? Because we need to look at the real picture regardless of peak hours. Not just peak hours, the real picture. There will be at least 64 adults residing in 32 apartments. These residents will have at least 64 cars. Now, you can challenge that, but we think we're pretty clear on that. These 64 residents will most likely leave and return to their apartments at least twice a day, okay? This means that we're really looking at least 128 plus round trips to and from their apartments onto Main Street. That is 128 plus cars attempting to make turns onto Main Street and into Maple Lane. First of all, that is very difficult to make a left turn. You got a stop sign right on College Avenue just a few feet away, and then you're going to have this additional traffic. That's strategic, but small intersections already crowded with oncoming cars, bikers, pedestrians, and joggers. As the Ditto EIR appendix indicates, Main Street is now burdened with 5,396 eastbound vehicles per day. 5,000! And 5,800 westbound vehicles per day. One must also factor in unmentioned round trips made by guests to these 32 proposed units, which include not only residents, but delivery trucks such as UPS, FedEx, disabled persons, shuttle buses, etc. No doubt we are looking at many more trips at this very, very dangerous intersection. Trying to make a left turn there is almost impossible. Thank you.
The next speaker is Cameron Tooley, and then after Cameron will be Catherine Galler.
Good evening. My name is Cameron Tooley. I live on College Terrace, which directly borders the 20 Ditto's Lane property. I'm Unit L, and the owner and resident of that property. And first, I'd like to thank the council for the commission for having this this forum and allowing us to speak our mind on this topic, and for staff for walking through the property line, the survey results for the property line. We appreciate that very much. I have some issues with the report that I wanted to voice tonight. One is on public safety, and this particularly fire, and the fire aspect in regards to access to College Terrace. The current property allows access for fire trucks from that direction because College Terrace is kind of a hard access. With the new proposed Building B, that would block that access completely. So they would have to come down College Terrace, which is very hard to get around. And so this is a very high fire area, so that's a problem that wasn't addressed. Also, the noise study in the EIR doesn't account for reflective noise off of Highway 17 that would reflect off the building into College Terrace. Doesn't address that at all, much less the walls that are proposed at least 6 foot high and the mitigation measures. So that I'd like that study added to the report. Also on the trail entrance to the Las Gatas Creek Trail at Main Street and Maple Lane, there's a lot of people that meander around that area, and it's a very heavily used entrance for that trail. I'm worried about the safety of that entrance for the people, and mitigation did mention separation of the access to the trail from the cars. However, it was very vague about it, and it wasn't in the plans as far as I could see anywhere. And I'd like to see that in writing somewhere, even though it's not on the Ditto's Lane property. It's part of this whole project plan. I'd like to see that somewhere so the public can comment on that. Some of my other concerns were voiced already: traffic, and there's also privacy and aesthetics that I think are the less than significant from the College Terrace point of view. Privacy and aesthetics, I disagree with strongly. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Catherine Galler, and then afterwards, Lisa Tooley.
Hello, my name is Catherine Galler. I'm the owner of the property at 120K College Terrace. It's the one adjacent to the project. I have read the Town of Los Gatos EIR report, and I am alarmed at all the mentions of the potentially significant impacts. It's the first time I've ever done this, but it really means a lot to me and my property. The traffic and the parking are already a problem on Main and College Avenue, and it doesn't take a study to see that. Ask any downtown patron, work commuter, or weekend bicyclist. The parking on College Avenue is always a problem. The current report states, as on page 27, that the added road curves will put bicyclists and joggers in danger. No one can predict the exact number of cars. However, we do know that the road is maxed out already by the penthouse apartments. I am deeply concerned about the dynamics of Los Gatos will be impacted from this unnecessary congestion. The current proposal does not supply enough parking for the housing demand. The single-car garages will undoubtedly be used for storage due to the 600, 900 square foot living space. And many people have garages, and they're not parking in them. The fire access is really important too, as Cameron mentioned. We were expecting the fire department to come that way in order to put fires out in our house. 32 units is too dense for such a small parcel of 1.4 acres. The study clearly states that the plans pose potential degradation of the neighboring living environment, deer crossing, and just generally what you have heard. What they mean to me is that 30 feet from my house, 3 stories will be built. I have a single family home, and the balconies will be looking into our kitchen, living room, bedroom, and backyards, ruining our views and privacy. The shadowing effects of these apartments, combined with the hill's water draining to run kind of a downhill, will result in damage to the wood decks, gardens, fences. my legal description says that I have a 19.3 setback on my preliminary title report that I got. And, am I just a few more minutes? Is
Yeah,
that
you have
what?
30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. Oh, my gosh. Okay. Well, basically, it's a density setback and the height of the project that is really a problem. And I would like you to look into all of these things. I thought I had it timed to 3 minutes, but I guess I didn't. So, and also they paid $3.1 million for the property when it was appraised for $1 million in 2002 and 2003. They suggested that it be a single-family dwelling. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I just want to remind people that if you don't have enough time in your 3 minutes, you are still welcome to provide written comments. This is just an opportunity to provide verbal, but the written comments, again, we will continue taking even after this meeting is over, okay? Ms. Lisa Tooley.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lisa Tooley. I reside at 120 College Terrace, Unit L, which is the unit that abuts the proposed project. We've been homeowners for a year and a half and did research onto what was going on with that property before we purchased, and there was no information available in 2009. And here we are in 2011 and have a complete project to look at. I appreciate this forum that the administration and the commission has provided us today. And as a former low-income advocate for Santa Clara County in the late 90s, I can completely appreciate the town's commitment to low-income housing and can only embrace it if it's in the spirit of the town's general plan and its overarching guidelines and principles, which state that new developments must be in similar character or rhythm as a neighborhood. This project is not that project. This is a 3-story building, 38 feet high, 3 times the density that my townhouse complex is, and despite the mitigation efforts, it destroys the view and the character and is detrimental to the riparian habitat and other habitat as well. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each of the items that I'm concerned about. We'll provide that in writing. But my general concerns lie in the land use and aesthetics section. And I see that as being incomplete in that the view balconies from my unit, Unit L, and the view balcony from Unit F, as well as the entrance views from Units H, I, J, K, are not addressed at all. And just to give you an idea, I have a picture from our view balconies. This is with the story poles where you can see through, and this is what it's going to look like after the view is blocked. And I feel like this is significant enough that this should be fully explored in the environmental impact report. Additionally, the discussion on the deck from the southern townhouse, which is my unit, view was inaccurately characterized in that it says that the prior view was a filtered view of the Ditto's home, when in fact it was a view of terraced vegetation, and I have a picture of that as well. The view was a distant view of the chalet, and by the way, all of these old growth trees will be taken down with the project, so something new will need to be planted there within a 5-foot space. My other concerns are regarding a noise study, and there needs to be a modeling of a noise contour study which contemplates the new buildings and the new built environment, as well as all the hardscape that's going to be added. The fire safety is also, the access will be cut off, and this could be a liability for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tooley. Are you submitting those for the record, or? Yes. Okay, next we have Mario Perez, and after Mr. Perez, we have Todd Johnson.
Ready? My name is Mario Perez, and I live at 120 College Avenue, Unit H. And over the last 5 years, I've acted as a guest parking monitor. I make sure that the residents don't use guest parking as resident parking. And I'm going to talk about the lessons learned over the last 5 years and how you could use what I've learned monitoring 12 units and 1.5 acres in similar area that you're proposing, and how my lessons could help you. First, in your report, you try to model how people behave, and generally a lot of human behavior models do not work as intended. So I think my practical experience could serve you some. One, it's really difficult to monitor how people are going to use their parking spaces. People will typically use their garages to store property, and then they'll infringe on guest parking spaces. Or if the guest parking spaces are not available, they'll use the streets. So we have had problems with people on College Avenue that do not like us at 120 College using the street. So that's a problem that you might see in this area. Say the Los Gatos penthouse apartments, the retail businesses, the 2-hour parking over the bridge next on Main Street, and the Soda Works parking spaces. They might have conflict with your residents and the high density. The other thing is that it's really hard to keep residents from parking in areas that aren't designated parking, for instance, in front of the garage, next to walls, and the problems that this has caused is that it doesn't allow emergency vehicles to come and do their service if they're needed, because the area is blocked. So I've constantly had to remind people not to park in front of their garages or areas where they shouldn't, because of that hazard that if something does happen, that the fire engines need to get through, or ambulances. And I'm sure that in an area such as Ditto's Lane, where it's sort of a dead end, that could happen, and you need to have consistent monitoring of that area. Also, family events and parties, they amplify the problem. People will need more parking. So also enforcing these rules are really difficult. We are 12 units in 1.5 acres, similar to Ditto's, and enforcing will also be a challenge for you. So my takeaway is, if you could please maybe contact me and see what other problems we have.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. We have Todd Johnson, and then afterwards Flint Polskamp.
Thank you very much. I have several concerns, and I'll submit most of them in writing at a later time. But what I found was that the EIR, I think, was actually very biased from the very beginning. The town, in the letter to the town, their proposal, they said in alternate properties, they will only consider town-owned properties. In the 2000, which I have no idea why they would only consider town-owned properties, why they couldn't buy a piece of property just like they bought Ditto's Lane. Secondly, it doesn't consider the fact that the 2007-2014 housing report completed by the town of Los Gatos says it only cost 1/5 of the amount of money to build off-site, to buy an existing thing and give vouchers, as opposed to building something which would be a lot greener and would have a much smaller effect. The Holberg, I've asked Joel, and I filed a petition to get all the documents on the history of this project, of which I have not been able to get, and only yesterday Catherine showed up and we have a Holberg appraisal report at $100 million for a single house. In that report, it cites all kinds of proposals that the town has turned down, from everything from 16 units to 11 units to I think 6 houses, citing the town cited such things as secondary access for fire. In trying to go through all these files, they were never provided to us, and so I think that that's critically important. Okay, the parking study. Obviously, the parking study has some serious concerns in it. Location of the open parking, location of handicap parking. The fact that this will be probably a much higher occupancy level than a regular apartment house, since it's low income, one can expect to have a very low vacancy factor. That was not considered. The fact that tandem parking is much less efficient, as we all know, that people don't park, and if you don't have last in, first out, I guess it is, you have a problem with that, so people tend to use it for storage. That was not considered whatsoever. The location of the open parking in comparison to where the single units will be was not considered. But the most kind of interesting thing that I found in it was that they cite a piece of property over on Riviera Terrace, and they say that they have basically X number of parking spaces. Well, the parking study eliminates the fact that the Sobrato family, who owns it, also owns the adjoining piece of property, which has room for approximately 50 cars on it. And last night and the night before, there are 30 cars, over 35 cars on the abutting property, which is owned and operated and is listed as a parking area. There are parking signs for the hotel, for the apartment house. So in fact, they're turning around and saying, this property has excess parking. There's a lot of extra parking. The fact is, because they're not considering an additional 50 space.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Okay, I have Flint Pulskamp, and then after Mr. Pulskamp is Perez Filey.
Hello, Planning Commissioners. My name is Flint Pulskamp. I'm the homeowner at 87 College Avenue. I'm here to voice my strong opposition to this EIR, as there are some very serious faults and omissions in this document. Given the sheer size of the document, you'd think that it would have been a little more comprehensive in nature. Instead, it seems to me and some of my fellow neighbors to be mostly boilerplate and tries to discount many of the staged or stated designations of potentially significant impact. I won't repeat a lot of the other concerns that my fellow neighbors have, but I do want to bring up just a couple additional issues that I thought would be unique, but it looks like even some of those have been brought up also. You don't have to go very deep into this EIR to find some very serious deficiencies. First and foremost is noted 3.4.6, the access and parking. This is primarily, there's only a couple areas where they actually talk about the access being the Maples Lane and what they're doing to the Maples Lane. Most of the EIR focuses actually on the project itself, and I believe that the most serious and egregious problems actually lie in the access from Maples onto Main Street. It says that it is currently 10 to 20 feet wide and that certain sections of the Maple Lane would have to be widened by as much as 10 feet. This would require and involve grading and construction of the retaining walls along the northwest side of both roads, and it references figure 3-15. I'm concerned about this primarily from the impact on the trail, being that the bikers, the runners, and a lot of people actually use this area as sort of a staging area. You only have to go down there on a Saturday morning or Sunday morning, just see literally dozens and dozens of people using all of Maples Lane to warm up, warm down, congregate. By having this thing widened and having it as a thoroughfare, I believe that it'll pose not just a traffic hazard, but also a health hazard, and it'll also displace a lot of these so-called recreational bicyclists and pedestrians and runners. Second, I'll bring up another one. Was also mentioned, well, that one was mentioned. Another one was 3.4.7, the very next issue, called construction schedule and staging. It says in the EIR that this construction is supposed to last about 13 months. All the staging will be on site. It'll be all on-site parking for the construction. The EIR states that this will take place, but doesn't adequately address whether there is sufficient area for all of this activity. Whether this be the material staging or actually the parking for the contractors and construction workers, anybody can see that this is simply not enough room for all this. What does it mean? It means that you're going to have some big impact. You're going to have a lot of these cars, these construction trucks parking on College Avenue and also Main Street. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I guess in final, this would be a big mistake to accept this EIR as a thing.
Perez Filey, am I pronouncing that correctly? And then afterwards is Tom Spilsbury.
I'm Perez Filey. My wife and I live on 99 College Avenue. Town of Los Gatos 2020 general plan designates Ditto's Lane as a very high fire hazard area. I don't think it would be far-fetched to assume that College Avenue is the same. And fire hazard and safety are my primary cause of concern in connection with the development on Ditto's Lane and the congestion that's going to come from it. On page 41111, essentially the report states that long-term fire hazard risks are incremental. It argues existence of fire hydrants, sprinklers, etc. reduces the risk. First, I seriously doubt that replacing a 9,500 square feet dilapidated firewood with over 31,000 square feet of space packed with variety of flammable, high temperature burn, electronics gadget would only increase the incremental risk of the fire. We are talking about 240,000 cubic feet of area packed with stuff. Secondly, provision of all the fire equipment, fire hydrant, sprinklers, will not reduce the risk of fire. Hopefully that will help the spread, stopping the spread of the fire, but certainly not reduce the risk of the initial fire. The draft EIR also spells the capacity of the first responders and the expected 7 minutes response time. While the 7 minutes response time is 1 minute below the federally mandated 8 minutes for EMS, is far short of a 4 or 5 minutes that's typical for towns of same size in California. So the question is, what will happen if there's two fires happening at the same time on Diddle's Lane and College Avenue? How fast can they respond to the two fires? How will the three engines, which are the primary engines, the two on downtown and one on Shannon Road, that have to respond to this, are going to fare against two catastrophic fire? And what will happen to the water pressure on the fire hydrant in College Avenue, since the main line from College Avenue is going to charge the Diddle's Lane? I was 1997 sitting across and unfortunately seeing the fire across the freeway. My wife and I were packed because at the same time there was a fire burning at the end of College Avenue at Novitiates. This is not speculation. This is not possibility. This has happened. This is a high danger fire area as admitted by the town. And I think it's very, very important for the town to step back, take a look, and reevaluate this thing, do a study on the fire hazard, and then decide on the size and scope of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tom Spilsbury, and then afterwards Susan Kenkel.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Tom Spilsbury. I live at 120 College Terrace Court, Unit A. I've been the owner of that property since 1987 and lived on College and since then, or Reservoir Road, either one. I have not read the EIR. I'm here as probably the lone resident who's for the project. I have been involved in the real estate business with affordable housing for the last 20 years, and I applaud this commission, the town, on trying to get an affordable project approved. It's difficult for financing. It's difficult with neighbors. It's difficult with regulations. And I think that it's something that we all need. If there wasn't affordable rentals here in 1962 when my mom, grandmother, and sister moved here when I was 10, I've been lucky enough to grow up in Los Gatos and go through the school system here and become a resident of this town. Apartments have not been built in this town because land is so valuable. And I think that this is a valuable project to the town. It adds diversity of population. It will help people who live here to afford to live here. And I would just like to applaud and give my approval for this project.
Thank you. Susan Kenkel, and then afterwards Terry Moss.
Susan Kenkel. I live at 99 Reservoir Road, which is off of College. Los Gatos has 4 noticeable problems that it has to contend with: traffic congestion, lack of public parking, crowded school system, and public safety services. All of these areas are covered in this EIR, and all of them are negatively impacted by this project, contrary to the report's findings. The DEIR addresses these issues only as far as the construction period is concerned. It offers only a short-term view. Therefore, we must consider the long-term effects of this project in these areas. One cannot claim that 32 new residences and at least 58 more cars cannot have a major, long-lasting negative impact on our town. Main Street will forever have increased traffic. Main Street is already overtaxed several times every day. The College Avenue Main Street intersection is confusing at its very best. The addition of regular traffic and the Maple Lane portion will create dangerous conditions. The parking demand in the surrounding streets will be increased. It is already woefully lacking. This will have a negative impact on the town's merchants and on its residents. We also must remember that this location is the main entrance, the only one with a list of rules for our creek trail. It is the main entrance for all of our town. This does add significantly to our traffic and parking problems, and it was not recognized that much in the DEIR. Our excellent schools are already at capacity, and there is the possible problem with Lexington. The increased demand of a wholesale rise of an enrollment that this project will probably bring will overcrowd our resources in our schools. High density, and if I may quote this project's description, low and very low income housing generates problems, period. Our public safety services will have to meet the needs of this new population without new hiring because of our projected budget shortfall. And also please remember the novitiate and convent also need these public services regularly. It is apparent that this proposed project will provide no benefits to the town of Los Gatos. When looking at these four vital areas, it is obvious that all of these areas, the impact will be significant and irreparable. It will only have a negative effect on our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry Moss, and then afterwards, Todd Davis.
Good evening, Terry Moss, 18 East Main, Penthouse Apartments. I'm concerned greatly about safety and aesthetics, but before I get to that, I'd like to just take an overview here. Common theme that we're seeing is that we have an environmental impact report that ignores the environment. It talks very narrowly focused on this one project. There are sound studies about the project. There are aesthetic views about the project, but there is nothing about the impact along the road on Maple, which will be significantly impaired with respect to widening Maple is going to remove the green belt in significant parts of Maple, exposing the freeway, its ugliness, and its noise. So that's a very, very severe problem that is nowhere to be seen in the draft. The safety is an immense issue. One of our people here who watches the intersection every day can tell you about the near misses. Trying to make a left out of Maple requires the good courtesy of people making a legitimate left out of College or coming up after stopping to give you a pass, because you've got to kind of put your hand out there to get through the intersection as it is now. If we had another 120, 300 cars trying to get through there, it's going to be a problem. A unique problem for us is Ditto Lane. Ditto Lane passes between our two buildings. It has parking there. It's very narrow, and I'm sure that what's going to happen, because it happened in the past, is that folks that are trying to get down Maple, which is the designated thoroughfare, are going to see it clogged up, and they're going to try to skip through Ditto Lane between our two units, which is going to cause a huge hazard and a great problem. So the other issue was not addressed was the sound coming up from the freeway. We were promised by the city aesthetic studies that would show all the trees. When those trees come out to expand expand Maple out into the creek, it's going to wipe out this green belt, and there'll be the sound coming up. Those studies have not been forthwith. Concerned about the bikers and all who just use Maple Lane to stretch, and certainly the overflow parking is going to go right into our community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Now we have Todd Davis, and then afterwards, Brian Hatfield.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Todd Davis. I live at 1032 Camino Ricardo, San Jose, but I own 18 Ditto's Lane, the immediate neighbor to the west of 20 Ditto's Lane where the project is. I also lived at 18 Ditto's Lane for 12 years. I'm very familiar with that entire neighborhood. Before I say what I was going to say, the first thing I want to say is I'm disappointed in Tom Spilsbury. Mr. Spilsbury came here telling you that he's here to support low-cost housing. Mr. Spilsbury was directly involved in the transaction of Ditto's Lane between Rome and the town. He made money on this deal, and he didn't tell us that when he came up here and spoke.
Mr. Davis, if you could keep your comments towards us, thank you.
I'm not disappointed in you yet. I'm disappointed in Mr. Spilsbury, and that's why I was looking at him. Fair enough. Specifically with respect to the environmental impact report, I'm concerned with parking. The town requires those 32 units to have 80 spaces. This project provides for 58 spaces. There's going to be more than 58 cars that are going there. Where are they going to park? They're going to park in my lot. I own a third of an acre right next door. I currently have 9 designated parking spaces and currently have room for 4 more. However, when the town takes my road, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the town's plan, is to take my road, I'll lose those 4 parking spaces. My tenants use all of those parking spaces now, so not only will I have less parking spaces, the new people that are living at 20 Ditto's Lane, they're going to park as close as they can to 20 Ditto's Lane. When those parking spaces fill, they're going to park at my building. That means that somebody's got to sit there and tow cars. Otherwise, my tenants will have no place to park. In the environmental impact report, that's 4.8.7, and that is a flawed report, and it is illegal according to the town code. I'd like to take your attention to 4.2, which is aesthetics. Primary problem with aesthetics are the removal of trees. Apparently, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 54 oak trees which are being marked for removal. Those are mature oak trees. 26 of those are on my property. Right now, when you look out of the windows of my building, and each of my apartments have floor-to-ceiling windows, you see oak trees. When those oak trees are removed, you're going to see freeway, and that's it. It's going to absolutely destroy the views from my apartment. Yes, I do have a financial interest in this, and I am disclosing that, but it's real. That's a real aesthetic interest, which is going to disappear forever. You can replant trees, but I'll be 80 years old before they're as high as they are now. And nobody in this room will be able to enjoy the trees that you plant today for another 30 or 40 years. I'm concerned about the noise because, as Terry Moss said, the green belt blocks the noise. And once that green belt's gone, we're going to have the noise from the freeway. Primarily, I'm concerned about the impact that widening...
Mr. Davis, you're going to have to put me on your list. I'm going to have to cut you off. It's 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Hatfield, and then afterwards, Lee Quintana.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Brian Hatfield. I'm the owner of the salon located at 14 and 16 East Main Street. The first time I was in front of the Las Casas Planning Commission was 7 years ago, when I was trying to decide if I was going to move my salon to Las Casas. My decision was prededicated the outcome associated with the 5 parking spaces located on Maple Lane, which served the building, and I currently am the Las Casas Trail. During that planning meeting, the Commission made it the right decision and made those spaces public parking with a 3-hour limit. Based on that decision, I opened Capelli Salon, and I have prospered from a great location in a wonderful town. I gainfully employ 10 stylists, 4 assistants, 3 administrators, and benefit of 5-star Yelp rating. I have 2 concerns with the current proposal: elimination of the 5 parking spaces that I fought so hard to get, designated public parking that currently support not only my business, also the Las Casas Trail. Converting Maple Lane into a 2-lane road, the parking spaces cannot be eliminated because basically a lot of people use it for the trail. Just if you could even be down there like on a Saturday, just seeing like families out, bicycles out, they come out into to Maple Lane. It all just they just kind of take over that whole area. And as Terry said too, pulling out there, trying to make a left-hand turn, you can't even see cars coming. So it does require a public safety risk that the conversion of the lane poses to the citizens of Los Gatos. For the last 7 years, I've stood in front of the window for 12 hours per day. I overlook the intersection of Maple Lane Street. No one understands the dynamics of the intersection better than I do. I am opposed to the conversion of the Maple Lane into a 2-lane. The traffic, like I said, the traffic congestion, being down there like even at 2:15, 2:30, like when school lets out, it's just a standstill traffic. Accidents on the freeway, I mean, people trying to get in through town, out of town, it's just gridlock, it's stopped. I even know the people that run the stop signs. I mean, that stop sign right there, a lot of people don't even see it, they go through because there's so much traffic. So with that, like I said, it would just be detrimental because as we know that parking in this town is very valuable and very precious. So thank you.
Thank you. Lee Quintana, and then afterwards, we did have a card for Andrew Wu. I don't know if he said, okay, would you still like to speak?
I'm so unused to being called first with Alice up and then my dedicator.
Okay. Okay, and then if anyone else would like to speak, please submit a card.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. Many of the things that I would have liked to say have already been said, but I would like to just iterate the sections of the EIR that I do think are inadequate. The background history of the project and the timing and how it came to be town property, as well as the history of past applications for projects on this site. The aesthetic impact of taking out all the trees. I don't think that was identified very well in the EIR, especially along the Maple Lane portion. In addition, the aesthetics of the proposed project itself does not seem to me to be consistent with many of the community design principles that we have. With regard to the redevelopment plan, it's my understanding that if eminent domain taking of land by the redevelopment agency was allowed at all, it was time limited to a specific period of time, either 6 months or a year. And lastly, well, 2 things. The historic section on this report is accurate. There's going to be a significant impact. My concern is, how did the town demolish those buildings before the environmental documents were approved? In the past, even when there were instances of public safety issues, et cetera, the town was almost reluctant or almost impossible to get demolition permits before they had an approved project in place. And lastly, just looking at all the general plan principles, et cetera, it brings to mind a sentence from a movie which has always resonated with me very strongly, and that is, principles don't mean anything if you're not willing to stand by them when it's inconvenient. And it seems to me that that's what's happening in this case. If this were a private project coming before you, the EIR would look very different.
Okay. And Mr. Wu.
I could yield my time to my friend Todd Davis, but I don't think those are the rules of the House. My name is Andy Wu. I live at 28 Euclid. I've resided in this town since 1991. For 7 years, I was the designated driver to take my children to Los Gatos High School. My good friend Jack Veneta has provided me with a copy of the EIR, and it was provided to me last night, and I read it. Those trucks that are parked on College dropping off supplies, well, they're always parked illegally. Now, I'm going to offend some of my colleagues and neighbors who live on College, but that whole street on the port side top and starboard side bottom, that's designated no parking. Nevertheless, people park there all the time, and there is no enforcement. If you're going to put 60 more cars into that neighborhood, people are going to continue to park illegally on the street, and there will be no enforcement. This town, and collectively, the collective memory of this commission, knows that there is an existing traffic problem at Main and College. It did a study where one of the proposals was to put in a stoplight. For some reason, probably because of cost, a stoplight did not go in. It is now controlled by stop signs. And I've seen many a times where either motorists or bicyclists have simply blown through those intersections. It's just a miracle that nobody's gotten killed. Some joker someday is going to run over somebody, and that joker might very well be me, because I've come very close to hitting other drivers. I consider myself a fairly decent driver, having driven Great Britain in the countryside roads. When you're coming across the merge on one of those carriage roads, it's very exciting. Well, this is equally exciting to me. Many times I've seen close calls where it was just a matter of chance that somebody didn't get plastered all over the roadside. Now, I don't think this ER has been vetted out properly. Nobody has walked the ground to see what would actually happen to this neighborhood if you were to put all these people into this space. And I think that's all the time I'll take. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, any other speakers that would like to speak tonight, please just indicate so. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the public portion of this and just remind everyone that tonight was to take public comments. We're not here to comment or answer questions. Again, remind you that you still have an opportunity to provide written comments. Oftentimes when you're sitting at these, you hear something you would like to say or you'd like to repeat. Please submit written comments by the end of the business day, by February 4th. There's a commission study session on the 23rd. And then on March 9th, we're going to have the commission public hearing. Staff, do you mind please reminding everyone how they can provide written comments?
Written comments can be provided to staff at the Community Development Department from 8 to 1 Monday through Friday, or up in the town clerk's office. You can submit those from 8 to 5 during business days.
And the meetings that will be held that are listed here, I believe they are all at 7 p.m. Correct me if you're...
That is correct. And additionally, email correspondence or mail. They can be mailed or emailed.
And they will all be public noticed. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, commissioners, we have one more item, so let's take a minute to let everyone close out. But we are moving to agenda item 3. Okay, so we are moving to agenda item 3. It is, I guess we don't have an application. For those in attendance right now, we do have to continue our public meeting, so if you could please take your conversations outside. Okay, commissioners, agenda item number 3 falls under other business, and it is for the property located at 649 University Avenue. As a reminder, this was something we did not discuss at the last meeting, that we asked to be discussed. And Ms. Bailey, will you be providing a presentation?
No, I'm just here to respond to any questions that you may have regarding this.
Okay, Commissioner Jensen.
Maybe I can provide a little bit of background. I know that this was at the request of Commissioner Talasfor, who indicated that she had received calls or comments from members of the public asking her what was going on with the cell tower on University, and that sparked her concern, I know, regarding this particular item that we're looking at tonight. And I believe that all of us, or some of us, got a call from a person, I'm not remembering the name of the street right now, but the street off Kennedy where the house was approved, and the person called wanting to let us know that what was being built wasn't what was approved. And so what the concern was that when we leave things to staff to determine what might seem like a minor issue or an insignificant issue, is it turning out to be significant? And what I know you gave us the explanation here in the staff report regarding what happened with the cell tower, but I think, at least I know the reason that I agree with Commissioner Talasford that we ought to hear it is that there were 2 instances, and we were just wondering, how did staff determine what they were going to do? When was it going to come back? When was it significant enough? And did that warrant some kind of reconsideration from the Planning Commission about how that process took place?
Well, as explained, for this specific project, staff did analyze the proposed changes, and the main issue when the project was reviewed was actually the height increase, which staff addressed during the public hearing process. In terms of when they came in, the plan was still the same. They just wanted to relocate it to accommodate maintaining the existing cellular tower so the existing cellular service could be maintained. In the analysis, staff felt that the height was the issue. The height was not changing, and that moving it 16 feet, in relationship to the height of the structure, 16 feet didn't really seem as it would impact anybody. And in addition, that the structure was being relocated to the rear towards the rear of the property, as opposed to going towards the front of the property. So in that instance, staff felt that it would not be an impact visually, that there was going to be no additional visual impacts. If staff had the wrong assumption on that, we would like to hear that if you felt that we were in error in making that assumption.
For those commissioners on this specific project, I understand we had a broader discussion on change. Have you had a chance to go to the site and look at what is currently there versus the proposed picture that was given to us last year? And if so, how would you describe the change? Significant to me is very difficult to define, and so I think that's the discussion we wanted to begin with. What constitutes significant so that if it reaches a certain trigger point, it could be brought back. And so I want to hear some thoughts on using this as an example. What do you see before you now versus what was proposed, and how would you define it as significant? Commissioner Bourgeois.
So I have an office on University Avenue, so I drive by this twice a day on most days. And when the calls were coming in, I agree. When it went up, I was kind of visually shocked by it. But there were 2 towers. It was the calls and concerns came in when the second tower was still up. So visually, it really was. There were 2 towers. Subsequent to our last meeting, that second tower has come down. I also noticed today workers on the tower when I was driving to this meeting today, and it looks like, I know one of the concerns we've had about cell towers in the past has been, as they add more and more of these units to the tower, we have more and more cables, and the cables have been on the outside of the towers, adding to the bulk and the visual disruption of the tower, and it looks like the cables have been moved on the inside of the tower now. So I've actually seen, since our last meeting, visually significant improvements, and it actually looks more to me like what I thought we were approving. And I don't know if that's convenient timing, or was a result of it being called to people's attention that it was a concern of some people. But to my eyes, what is there as of today looks about what I thought we were getting. But as of last meeting, it was definitely different. So.
Any Commissioner Johnson?
I agree with that. When the 2 towers were up, and I think even still now, and I don't know if it's a result of the repositioning, or I also am at that intersection frequently, and especially if you're coming southbound, I guess it is on University, and if you stop at the light at Blossom Hill, and you look across at the hills, you just see tower. And I don't know if that's the location, or originally when there were the two towers, the bulk was very significant, not what I had thought we were approving. It was just a kind of a massive structure. I know that cell towers aren't pretty. So I do agree with Commissioner Bourgeois that it looks better now, but 16 feet doesn't seem like a whole lot, but if, given the concern that we have with where things end up in a view shed, particularly from certain intersections, a movement of that tower, you know, perhaps the reason we got all the comments is that it just became, for whatever reason, as you come by that, it just became much more obvious. People learn to ignore things. We learn to ignore telephone poles, which we probably shouldn't, but we haven't quite learned to ignore cell towers. And when it moves, I think it becomes a significant impact. So I don't know what the cutoff would be or how much it's going to move, but to my mind, something made it become much more prominent than I had expected. And I don't know if it's the shift in the location or not.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
If you could refresh my recollection, we have a couple things, I think, going here. And first, let me say this. I'm very sympathetic to staff trying to make things easier for everybody, and I think that's what happened here. And you were concerned not only with the applicant, but the effective service by the applicant. I think that's a good thing. But is it true that two things were being asked of you? One, to allow a tower to exist while another tower was being built, which obviously had to be on a different location, or you couldn't have one tower stay there and another tower being built. And if that's the case, then that did not come before us. So I'm not really hung up on what comes before me. But when something does come before us, and we go through whatever we go through, and we say, yeah, you can do it, and then we find out two things. One, they're going to have two towers up for some period of time, which I think we didn't know. Maybe I'm forgetting that. And two, it is going to be moved 17 feet, and whether that's inconsequential or not, you've heard, at least from one commissioner, that she did not consider it inconsequential. I don't want to get into a thing where we're arguing with staff. I think you people do a really first-rate job. But I think I'm almost more troubled by having two towers up at the same time, which had not been run with it for us. I don't know that there was any shortage of time when they could have come back and run that before us. So sometimes things just have to go on in life, and you have to make these judgments of discretion, and I'm all for that. But I haven't heard any facts here which would explain why time was of the essence, and we couldn't consider two requests. One, to keep two towers up for a period of time, and I don't know what the period of time was, and two, move it to the exact location where it's now been moved. We may have said, fine, that was a good idea. But when people say to us, and I think perhaps many times wrongly, that what you approved didn't happen, we don't want that to occur, and I'm not suggesting it does occur, but we have to be on top of it. So I hope I'm trying to, the message I'm trying to get across is, I don't mean this as a criticism of you. I mean it as discussing something together. I think in this instance, I'm more troubled by the two coexisting without discussing it. Maybe a great idea. Maybe that was the right thing to do. In fact, probably was the right thing to do. But there's no reason why they couldn't have asked us that in the first instance. And if they, I find it hard to believe that it just occurred to them. I mean, that's their business. Had it just occurred to them that maybe if they took a tower down, they might have a problem? So I don't know why we were out of that loop. I have heard no evidence to suggest that anybody would have been hurt by having said, why didn't you tell us that in the first place? Since you didn't, come on back and tell us. So that's my comment.
Ms. Bailey, are you aware, can you just kind of remind us of the process after it was approved? Was there a change that took place that made the applicant aware that they had to have 2 towers in place?
Staff was not aware that they were proposing to put up 2 towers. I don't know the background of what made them realize that, they may have known that and came in after the fact. I just do know that during the building permit process, they brought that to our attention and asked for our review on that. And in response to Commissioner Bourgeois' comment that no, the tower has not been final. They have still been working on it, and I don't think they're even aware that this conversation is going on at the moment. So, but you, Commissioner O'Donnell did raise a good point. Based on this proposal, we'll be more sensitive in the future to try to anticipate these types of requests in the future, and also be more sensitive to your concerns of what we may consider not significant, but it could be significant. And we'll have to look at a process how to get that to you, because typically it would be, they would need to modify the application for you to officially look at it. If we are looking at ways to streamline processes, and maybe if we could find a different alternative to present that to you.
When you consider the background too, this is not a homeowner who had to do something and is not well versed in all this stuff. This is a company, and I'm not being critical of them. In fact, by not being critical, I'm saying they must have known. They're just not. They didn't fall off the turnip truck. They've done this before, and I would hate to get the message out that go through something with the Planning Commission and don't worry about it because the staff will take care of your problems. I want them to know they've got a standard, and if they have to come to us in the first instance, and that's not our decision, that's the town's decision, don't game the system. Thank you.
Commissioner Erickson.
I don't want to repeat anything or that any of the other commissioners have said, because no point in that. I guess I would make the one observation, Ms. Bailey, that in other types of projects, there are often conditions that mitigate what I might call the construction period, for lack of a better name. So it seems like to me that part of the process, which resulted in 2 towers and a relocation and so forth, weren't acknowledged somehow in the process, as they are typically in a process, and so there was no opportunity to consider what the mitigation measures might have been did they have a need to maintain service, which seems to be a reasonable consideration. So I guess I would wonder if in another project the staff and the applicant had an oops kind of moment where they discovered that there needed to be some other mitigation measures that they weren't aware of, and I'm not, for whatever reason they didn't, it doesn't really matter to me. It seems like to me, would one come back with other kinds of, back to the commission, to redo the conditions that were mitigating that, which is maybe seems like to me what happened in this situation.
Well, in the report we did summarize for different types of applications what would trigger it to come back for you to for the review by the Planning Commission. If it conflicts with a condition of approval, if there were specific issues raised by the Planning Commission and or the general public that really wasn't part of a condition, but we just know that it was an issue, we would know not to approve something like that. It just depends on what the request is. It's hard to be that specific.
Commissioner Jensen?
So my question is, and I don't mean to be at all critical of you guys, because I know you have a really hard job and you do a really great job at it. So what would be the answer? Would it be more specific indications of concerns about a particular item, or would it be more specific conditions? Would it be a limitation, which probably isn't a good idea, on staff discretion? What would you suggest would be, instead of bringing it back to the Planning Commission, which probably isn't the best idea unless it's dramatic, and then there's a question whether this one was dramatic, but what would you suggest?
Just thinking off the cuff, I mean, we could do potentially, I'd have to check with legal counsel, just sending you like an informal email that we found this as a minor change. We're bringing this to your attention. If you have any concerns, please let us know. We could do something like that potentially.
One thing first. One of the things I think that at least I would like is that constant feedback, because as Commissioner Talasfori said, she gets calls. Fortunately, I haven't ever gotten a call. But it's nice to know that things that have been approved, whether or not they've changed, at least to be on top of it so that we aren't taken by surprise, so that if there is a change and should a change occur, it's something that we're aware of. And it doesn't seem like it's so off the cuff. And so I think that feedback, however way we can make it more appropriate, would be certainly appreciated. You know, the great example, I think, is how when appeals are now overturned or brought to the council, we always get that feedback back. This is what happened. These are the reasons why it may have been overturned or it may not. And I know that I certainly appreciate that constant loop. Commissioner O'Donnell, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm not suggesting, and that's just me, that we have to be involved in every single decision you folks make. I don't want to be involved that way. But I think there is some, I find it a little hard to believe that one wouldn't at least have a question. We're going to be doing two things. We're going to be keeping one tower up that was not discussed, and we're going to be building a new tower in another location that wasn't discussed. That, to me, wouldn't tie your hands too much to say either bring it back, there being no time pressure, and I'm not aware of any time pressure, or sending us an email that says, what do you think? Or we've decided it ought not to come back because. And then if we don't say something, fine. And we also don't get somebody saying, well, what are you guys doing? So that one, the one we just are talking about, it's true the height was the same, and it's true that it was 16 or 17 feet, but it was also true that nobody bothered to discuss how long it would be up, the second one would be up, and as Marcia said, is the view different from that location? And none of us had a chance to even look at that. So I believe your judgment is good, and I don't think you should have a real difficult time saying, this is one I ought to send an email on, or this is one that ought to come back.
Well taken, so thank you.
Any other comments, commissioners? Okay, well, and Ms. Bailey, do we have any other items from community development?
Yes, I just wanted to brief you on the council retreat they had on January 22nd regarding the strategic goals for the next 2 years. They did implement what the commission had recommended. They're going to continue with the implementation of the general plan action items, develop a sustainability plan, continue to work to achieve affordable housing strategies, obviously the North 40, and update the Los Gatos Boulevard plan. They realized that the North 40 and the Boulevard plan were tied together. It was really important to get those going together. Community benefit, although it's not part of the strategic goal, council realized it's very important and that we do need to better define that. So that is on their work plan to continue that discussion. I don't know if that'll be at a joint retreat or how that will be happen, but they did see that as an issue.
I do have a question of that. If I recall, and Commissioner Bourgeois, you were chair at the time, so please correct me if I'm wrong, we did place the Los Gatos Boulevard plan as our top priority because of the timing of all the projects coming in this year. Was there a discussion of when we can anticipate that, a draft of that, or some ideas or a discussion based on that?
There was a date not discussed there. Internally, we have a date, and I apologize. I can't give you the specific date. I'll get that for you at the next meeting. But I also forgot, they did include with the alcohol policy to include the entertainment as well. That's pretty important.
Any questions on the goals that were discussed? Commissioner Bourgeois.
Just to clarify, on the Los Gatos Boulevard plan and North 40 plan, did they discuss traffic, like a comprehensive traffic study as part of that, or not? That was part of the commission's request to them, and I just don't know if that.
Well, internally, we're doing that
Okay.
already. Traffic is a big issue. I mean, we've actually have been having lots of joint meetings with Parks and Public Works on how to handle the traffic for projects along the boulevard, North 40, and how to deal with the existing projects. So internally, we're very sensitive to that
Great.
and trying to find alternatives on how to look at that.
Thank you.
Any other reports? Okay. Commissioners, anything to bring up during commission matters? Okay, well, thank you for a great meeting, and this meeting's adjourned.